are demons.
Not enough pain.
What's up, YouTube? It's Kael'Rian, back with another video. Today we're talking about something that's sort of interest to me to close out Legion. As I'm recording this, we're just a little over a day away from the global launch of Battle for Azeroth, so everybody's getting ready, everybody's real hyped and ready to have a good time. But you might have had a conversation with some of your guildies or friends that have gone something like this. Basically, people might be excited about Battle for Azeroth, but not really excited. And today I kind of wanted to talk about why that is. So in this video, we're going to kind of deep dive on that topic. We're going to talk a lot about Legion in general, but we're also going to take a look at why it is that Battle for Azeroth might not be exciting people very much. So first of all, it's worth saying that Legion, right now, it's really hard to actually say with any degree of certainty how Legion will rank for players. It was a pretty good expansion. I had a good time. It's probably one of my more enjoyable times playing WoW. But a lot of that comes as a contrast. If you played during Warlords of Draenor, I think you'll kind of know what I mean by that. But it's basically, the case was for me that Legion was such an improvement over Warlords of Draenor that it was kind of hard to not have a good time. Like, even when you were playing content and it maybe wasn't the best, it still felt better. So by comparison, it really kind of took the edge off of any rough edges in Legion. But it is also worth saying, I think, that Legion was such a great expansion and it was so attractive to people, I think, overall, mainly because it offered a lot of new systems. We haven't had an expansion with this many new systems in a really long time. I mean, if you look at what Legion offered fundamentally as a package, it offered us the artifact system. You got these new weapons with all of this new stuff in terms of how it affects your gameplay, what it offers you at endgame in terms of new content and new progression. You got world quests, which, okay, let's be real here for a minute. World quests are just daily quests. They're not any different necessarily. You just don't have to pick them up and then go do them. You just kind of, travel to the destination on your map, and then it pushes you the quest. So, not really all that different than a daily quest, but there are subtle improvements there. And what I think I like about it the most is that the system is more transparent than daily quests were in Warlords of Draenor. Because Warlords kind of gave you really simple daily quests. Like, you had the mission table at your garrison where it's like, okay, pick one of these objectives and go fill a bar. And the bar could be filled by any number of different things. You could go kill a bunch of mobs, you could go loot a bunch of containers or props in the world. There are a bunch of different things you could do, and it wasn't all that exciting. I think I maybe did those 6.0 launch quests once or twice each. After a while, especially once you started gearing up in raids, some of those rewards for Apexis were completely superfluous, and it took until 6.2 for Blizzard to really fix that. Legion's world quest system offered something fundamentally exciting and different, really, for Blizzard in general, which is that with scaling rewards, there was not always a point. There's definitely a point where you wouldn't want to do world quests a whole bunch, but there was almost always something that could be gained from doing a world quest. Maybe you just wanted to get a bunch of gold. Well, you could go and do a world quest that gave you a lot of gold. You didn't have to do the emissary. You didn't have to go do anything else. You could just go pick and choose the quests you wanted to do and do them. There were a couple of days where I didn't want to do world quests on any character, but they had some of the PvP tower quests and they were offering Marks of Honor. So I would do them on every 110 I had, and I would farm up the Marks of Honor and pile them up and send them out to get armor sets on my alts. So it was pretty cool in that way. Like, it gave you an element of choice. Alongside artifacts too, it gave you kind of a constant progression goal that made some of those world quests worth it. Maybe you didn't necessarily want to do a bunch of world quests, but there would be a few artifact power quests up in every zone, and doing an emissary would always give you an artifact power item plus something else. So generally, when you were progressing, doing world quests was worth it. And then kind of the big addition really to Legion in terms of systems was the introduction of Mythic Plus. There's no way around it. Of all the systems that were added in Legion, Mythic Plus was by far the most gigantic and the most impactful feature that they could have possibly added. It added this completely new and different way to play the endgame of World of Warcraft. It gave you this ability as sort of a dungeon player to really push and just do dungeons. You might know the path through a dungeon, you might have done it a million times, but you could do something different with Mythic Plus. You would have more content, you would have these affixes that would switch around and change and would make the dungeon completely different every time. Every week, those dungeons got different. That's a real weird way to put that. But Mythic Plus adds just a lot of flexibility to dungeons, because the reality of WoW's gameplay for probably the better part of the last decade is that at a certain point, dungeons suck. Not that they're, bad or that they're poorly designed, but that the emphasis on repeating dungeons continually for the sake of some sort of reward wears pretty thin. Even in expansions like Cataclysm, where you had like the weekly rewards, it felt more like a maintenance chore than actually something that you wanted to do. So Mythic Plus really expanded on that a lot. And it's opened up both a PvE mechanism for esports gameplay. It's opened up new avenues for endgame players that raid to have something to do that's pretty constantly available and different. And they're actually making a lot of good tweaks to this in Battle for Azeroth, with seasons, with affixes that are season specific. All of these are really, really good ideas that are extending the system. Legion also added scaling and the ability to pick your zones, which kind of only really impacts the leveling experience, but overall, it was another solid addition in that rather than doing the same path on every character, especially if you're like me, I've leveled 17 characters at this point to max. Actually, it might be 18 now. I think it is 18 now. I've lost count of how many 110s I have. That's how many times I've done this content. But it gives you kind of a fresh take on it, because you can do different patterns. You can zigzag across the continent. You can do them in a clockwise fashion, counterclockwise fashion. You can do them in alphabetical order. You can do them in reverse alphabetical order. You can pick them from a hat. You can do anything. And it does break up some of the monotony of leveling, because you can get different experiences every time just by kind of changing the way in which you level. If you do it in a different order, as weird as it sounds, it actually does change the experience. And that is a fundamental improvement to the way that Blizzard handles leveling. I'm not a person who's a fan of leveling, but I leveled more alts in this expansion more times than I've ever done in any other expansion. And this is one of the first times that I've had 110, or max level rather, Horde characters available to me during the actual content of the expansion, rather than just at the tail end after pre-patch is already out. So it added a lot of depth to the game. But it's worth now switching our emphasis to talk about Battle for Azeroth, because what you'll notice is that I talked about a lot of really big, major features that got added in with Legion. And I think that the thing that people are struggling with, and I think what I would source as the sort of cause of people's lack of enthusiasm about the new expansion, is that Battle for Azeroth actually kind of doesn't have that. It's not to say that there's not new content or new things coming. There are the tweaks to Mythic Plus with seasons and with seasonal affixes I just mentioned. They're changing around some of the existing affixes and at what levels they apply. There are tweaks to the artifact system that are being added for the Heart of Azeroth and the Azerite empowerments. But you'll notice that those all draw on a common theme, which is that they are features that are already in the game that have been tweaked. There's some other cool stuff, like having different continents for each faction and having to sort of build a foothold on the enemy continent. That's a cool idea. I think that will add some gameplay depth that doesn't already exist in the game. That's definitely new. War mode, I think, has the potential to make a lot of content in the game more interesting. It encourages people like me who've always played on PvE servers to do something a little different and maybe flag for PvP and try to do that in the open world. So there's definitely something cool about that. But there's a lot of these features that are based on or derived from things that were already in the game. Which is not to say that they're bad or that, Battle for Azeroth is already going to be a crappy expansion. Quite the opposite. I mean, I got to play a lot of the content in alpha. It's really good. I really like the leveling content. The dungeons are pretty great. There's a lot of interesting mechanics going on. And then what I've seen of some of the raid bosses from videos like Fat Boss is that there are some interesting new mechanics going into these things. And there's a lot to look forward to there. And then we still have this sort of looming introduction of the Warbringer's Azshara short video, which my expectation is that's going to come out at Gamescom a week after the launch. And it's going to be our patch 8.1 introduction. And there's going to be a lot of interest and intrigue for what happens there. There's a lot of story that we don't know yet about what happens in the war campaign or what happens in Uldir and what kind of, carries us forward past the point of the launch experience. But I think that it's fair to say that if you're not excited about Battle for Azeroth, I kind of don't blame you. I mean, outside of island expeditions, which actually in and of themselves are really just sort of variants of the Mist of Pandaria scenarios, there's not really a lot of new features. I think the other thing too is that Legion was following up on Warlords of Draenor, which was the biggest, wettest thud of an expansion ever that the game has literally ever had. It was a shitty expansion. It had a great leveling experience. It actually had really good raid content too, but it just didn't have enough stuff, and stuff didn't come out fast enough. And there wasn't really any reason or motivation to play much past just doing that content. If you were like me during Warlords, you just logged on for raid night and maybe you leveled alts, maybe you dicked around in the game a little bit otherwise, but it didn't really matter. For a lot of people during Warlords of Draenor, World of Warcraft fell out of being a part of their daily routine. And Legion was sort of it was this grand reintroduction to the game for a lot of people. And it seems fairly apparent from they didn't announce subscriber numbers, but from what they would talk about with login activity and things like that, that there was a lot of interest that Legion regenerated for the game. And it seems like Legion has maintained interest a lot longer than Warlords of Draenor did. I know that it's the case in my guild that people are more engaged with the game and remained engaged with the game a lot longer than they would have otherwise. And there were a lot of elements to that with Legion. It wasn't just the fresh coat of paint, it wasn't the new systems alone, it was also that Blizzard seemed genuinely willing to learn from mistakes. Where Warlords of Draenor had slow content releases, Legion was on a frantic pace with patches, which was excellent. I was really glad for that. And yeah, sure, it's been, not counting 8.0, I mean, well, counting the time between 7.35 and 8.0, we had, maybe 6 months of, well, actually it was closer to 7 months of no content. But the content pacing was done really, really well. Even having that big gap with that last patch, 7.35 also added the revamped leveling. So maybe it wasn't worth it to play endgame content at that point. Maybe you had everything leveled, you didn't have anything you needed to do at that point. But you could just as easily hop on to a lobby and actually play through leveling again. You could level an allied race if you pre-ordered Battle for Azeroth. I have a 110 Void Elf and a 110 Lightforged Draenei now. And that's stuff that, you know, it's not necessarily the most exciting content, but it certainly is something. And I will give Blizzard credit for that. Even if the potential exists that some of the stuff in Battle for Azeroth might be a little dicey for some people. I'm seeing a lot of concern about story beats. I'm seeing a lot of concern about how things like the Horde are going to be handled. You know, and I'm still of the wait and see mindset about all of that. The potential exists that it could be a disappointment in terms of story, but I think that that speaks to the greatest strength of Legion, and I think that speaks to why people aren't as excited about Battle for Azeroth. Legion had a lot to prove, and it proved it. For any individual complaints you might have about elements of the expansion, overall, Legion was a solid expansion start to finish. Short of 6 months, it didn't really feel like there was any weak spot in the game. There's content you could point to that was less than stellar. Tomb of Sargeras as a raid was pretty bad, I think, overall. There just wasn't a lot to enjoy there. I think that there were some elements of content that were definitely placeholders that kind of existed to fill time and give you something, you know, minimal to do in between other bits of content like Deaths of Chromie. But Deaths of Chromie was awesome. Yeah, it was a little bit of content that didn't have a whole lot to it, but it was great. It actually kind of did a lot with what it did offer. And that's something that's worth repeating for Blizzard in the future. So, Battle for Azeroth is about to launch, and maybe you're not that excited, but I think that overall, it's an evolution rather than a revolution, and that's okay. As long as the content's solid, as long as the gameplay's there, honestly, like, I'm probably still going to be playing this game for a long time. As long as it's supported. I mean, at this point, I personally have been playing the game for 13 years, which is something I never envisioned being able to say about any game, ever. I've never been the type to replay games over and over, have annual playthroughs of stuff that I really, really liked. Basically, I was a one-and-done type person. Maybe a new game plus occasionally, but WoW kind of captured a lot of interest for me in a way that games before it hadn't done. I like that I have a game that I want to play pretty consistently. I enjoy having a game that's kind of always got something going on. My hopes for Battle for Azeroth are that the dungeon content remains updated and fresh like it did during Legion, that we get these Mythic Plus seasonal affixes add a lot of depth to the game, and that Blizzard maybe isn't afraid to keep some of them along and repurpose them if the seasonal affixes do really well and people enjoy what they're playing. I'd like to see raid content that pushes the boundaries and has more fights with more interesting stuff going on. I'd like to see more cohesion in between fights, less Tomb of Sargeras situations where you have multiple bosses with these sort of very, very similar mechanics and things going on. I'd like to see new zones added like we got in Legion, where we had Broken Shore added in 7.2, and then, you know, we had Argus in 7.3. I really enjoyed that sort of model. I think that there's a lot of potential for what comes next in Battle for Azeroth, but I think the other thing that's worth speaking to here really quickly is that we don't actually know what's coming out in Battle for Azeroth. There's a lot of speculation that once Azshara hits the scene, it's going to be all old gods, and we're going to be kind of trying to fix our shit after fighting with each other for so long. But we don't know that that's the case for sure. And even if that is the case, what content's going to come out for that? You know, it seems obvious that there would be a Naga-themed raid, and we'd probably go to Nazjatar or something of that sort. But realistically, I don't have any fucking idea. And that's actually kind of cool. Because in Legion, at least, there was kind of this clear progression of threats. Like, the Tomb of Sargeras was there from the beginning, and it seemed pretty apparent that it was going to be sort of the next raid. After that, we didn't have as much certainty, up until the cinematic from Kill Jaden, at which point it became pretty clear that we're going to Argus. But at the point that we knew that we were going to be doing Tomb of Sargeras, it was pretty hard to tell what was going to come after that. We still had the idea of Thaldranath that was floated during the initial announcement, and who even knows what that would have looked like. Maybe that would have had a better tie-in with Azshara, because it was very elfy, and who knows what would have been there. But the other thing is that how would that have like filled Legion's story? Like, I'm fascinated. We'll talk about that more in a different video, but like, we had no idea past the point of Tomb of Sargeras is basically the idea. And so once Argus was kind of brought into the forefront, we sort of knew where we were going, and it sort of solved all the doubt. But for Battle for Azeroth, we have no degree of certainty like that. It's hard to tell what Azshara will even be, where Azshara will be. Is she going to get her own raid zone that's all Naga themed? Is it going to be Old God themed? Is it going to be this transition into something like a Naga raid or into an Old God raid? Is she free of the Old Gods? We don't even know if that's the case either. There's so much that we can sort of look at and digest, but we have no idea. And I think that's actually exciting. I want to see what happens next, and I think what I'm already excited for more than even just playing the base expansion is seeing what happens after all of that, and once we start, you know, getting patches and playing more content. But that's going to do it for this one. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you made it all the way to the end here, let me know what you think the patches are going to be in Battle for Azeroth. But again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care, and I'll see you then.
Thank you. Back into the fight.